Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for another hosting capacity stakeholder workshop. We still, I see, have some people joining us, so we're going to give it about another minute and then we'll get started.
Jody, you were cutting in and out a little bit, just to let you know.
Thank you, Beth. Okay, I think we'll get started. Welcome to Xcel Energy's 5th Hosting Capacity Workshop for 2020. This is the second in a series of 3 workshops we're holding in September and that we are using to explore potential future uses for our hosting capacity analysis. I'm Jody Londo and I'll be your host today. I'm joined by several distribution engineering leadership, including Beth Chacon, our Director of Grid Strategy, Integration, and Innovation. She'll be starting us off. Also with us are Chris Punt, our Manager of Distributed Energy Resources Integration, and John Lee, our Senior Director of Distribution Engineering. We've structured today's workshop to maximize discussion and interaction. While I think it would be ideal for all of us to be in the same room, particularly for the interactive part of today's workshop, we'll be fully relying on technology today, so you may have to bear with us a little bit. We'll be using Zoom's live polling capabilities, and we're also planning to send you a more comprehensive survey in the next few days. All of this is to gather your feedback and input for our analysis of the costs and benefits associated with potential future use cases for the hosting capacity analysis. Today's session focuses on the use case where the hosting capacity analysis remains an early indicator for the interconnection process, however, with changes. We'll explore with you what we would need to change about the hosting capacity analysis to make it a valuable tool to be that early indicator, and fundamentally, what being an early indicator in the interconnection process means for you. Because our analysis is of both the costs and benefits, we'll also want and need to understand how the changes you'd like to see will impact your effectiveness in interconnecting with the Xcel Energy distribution system. So we have some questions to that end as well. If you have a question, feel free to unmute and ask it or use the chat function. We ask that if you use chat for a general question, please be sure you choose panelists and attendees in the drop-down box so everyone can see your question. Last, I'll note that once again, we're recording today's workshop and we'll post it to our website in the coming days. We'll also be submitting the PowerPoint slides we used today to the Minnesota Commission in our most recent hosting capacity analysis docket. We'll alert all of you via email when we make that filing, and we'll provide you a link to the filing on the state of Minnesota's eDocket site as well. I'll pause here for a moment and ask if anyone has questions before Beth gets us started.
So Luther, can you, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Jody covered most of this here, but we are going to provide a quick recap of the workshop 4, which was just last week. And as Jody mentioned, we are exploring the whole hosting capacity analysis and how that can serve as an indicator for connection. So we'd really like to hear from you today on how you utilize that current hosting capacity tool. And then our third thing is just to really understand the information that you need when you decide whether to request a pre-application screen, as we figure out maybe what's the best way to bring that information to you sooner, as it is one of the important pieces we know that you use to help select a site. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So as usual, our goal today is to get your feedback and perspective. And we're really excited about hearing from you today because we know hearing how you use hosting capacity will really help increase the efficiency and the value that it provides as we look for improvement. So that will just further shape how we're going to integrate the hosting capacity with the interconnection process. So we do have that long-term goal of looking at how we can better integrate these two. And we're really looking forward to your feedback today because we think that it will really improve how we look at hosting capacity and interconnection, some of these initial screens. And as we kind of sort through what's needed to better integrate these tools, these details coming from you will be very helpful. Next slide, please. So our recap from workshop 4, remember our intent was to provide some background about our goals and to introduce the use cases that we're looking at for future improvement. At that workshop, we did gather a lot of feedback around the gaps, and we heard from you some of the challenges that you face regarding interconnection. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris Punt shortly, but he's going to cover some of the developments that we have undertaken to improve our process. And again, this feedback, we're taking it all in because it really helps inform future discussion and what aspects are important in our analysis as we look at the costs and the benefits of the ordered use cases. I'm going to turn it over now to Chris Punt, who's going to discuss a few things, including how this workshop fits in with another effort that's going on with the interconnection process as well.
Thanks, Beth. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. We just wanted to take a few minutes here to kind of highlight some things going on in the interconnection world. Last time we heard some great feedback on interconnection related things as well as hosting capacity. And so we wanted to acknowledge the overlap that this kind of stakeholder format is offering, but also wanted to just kind of make sure too that the focus of discussion today is really on this first column. You see this hosting capacity workshop and the 4 use cases that we've lined out before. But also there is this other effort on interconnections, more tied to some of the things discussed last time actually with serial review, some timeline challenges, reserving capacity, those types of things in the distributed generating working group, which is actually taking place tomorrow. And I am going to invite Michelle Rozier if she wants to say a few words at this point on that. If you're on, Michelle.
Hi, Chris. Yeah, thanks. This is Michelle Rozier. I'm the Distributed Energy Resource Specialist for the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission, and I'm the staff lead for the Distributed Generation Working Group. If you are interested in those issues and you're not currently tracking, we call it the DGWG, I'll put my email in the chat and you're welcome to contact me and I can add you to the list. As Chris mentioned, the meeting is tomorrow. It's an all-day meeting starting at 9 a.m. And I can give you the agenda about when we're going to be talking about specific issues. But specifically tomorrow, we'll be talking about issues related to serial studies, in queue, and the timeframes for the review of interconnection applications, as well as an overview of how the first year with the new statewide interconnection standards have gone. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. So yeah, again, I mean, there's definitely a format for that discussion going forward. Definitely, we can hit on it here a little bit, but really want to focus on the hosting capacity piece and the use cases again that we have laid out. Next slide, please. And then with that, with some of the feedback last time, we heard more context is kind of wanted around the interconnection process and what we're doing at Xcel to make some of those improvements, as that is something we're definitely focused on. So again, I'm going to just spend a couple minutes here talking about the interconnection piece. And if there are some questions, let me know, and then we'll move on to the hosting capacity, kind of the meat of the stakeholder engagement here today. So the first thing is completeness reviews as we talk through the formal interconnection process. That's kind of that first step, reviewing, is all the information there, can we proceed, that type of a thing. Just recently, we've been working to not only train a few more people within Xcel to help out, but to bring in a consultant to help with that workload, because there is a high volume there that we're continually trying to keep on top of. And we think that's going to be a big help, especially with just getting started in the kind of that first step in the interconnection process. If we can help shore that up and turn those around quicker, we think that's going to be a big benefit. Longer term, there's some other things. I think a few of you are aware of this, but there's, if the completeness review fails for whatever reason, there's something that didn't come through, or there's a piece of information missing, that gets rejected, and it has to be obviously the developers will have to provide that information before it can proceed. And since MNDIP has started, there has been a fair amount of those, and so that's something too that we need to continue to work on. And I think we need help too from others in the industry to make those improvements and keep some of those things moving, because that does slow things down as well. Sounds like there was a question, or looks like there's a question already. So Steve is asking, what is the consultant's role, advice, or provide review services? It's a services role. Basically, they would be performing that completeness review for us to really help with just the amount that's coming through. So more than providing advice, that type of a thing. And so that's something right now we're in the midst of, and we expect in the next couple of weeks here to really start to, the consultant can start digging their teeth in a little bit more and making some progress there. So we expect some improvements there in the relative short term. The next piece, and which is related as well, is the initial and supplemental review screens. Right now, we use the same workforce to do completeness reviews and the review screens, with this consultants taking on more of that work. That opens up our existing resources to focus on screens and do that work more efficiently. So we think that that's going to help as well. And then we're looking towards potentially another resource there to help. We had some issues with, as everybody has with the pandemic and COVID and kind of hiring freeze within Xcel as far as adding bodies. And so we've got a few hurdles to jump through to actually add anybody, but that's something we're definitely pushing for as well. And looks like we're making progress to help with that. So a couple big things I think there to just be fully transparent about with everybody, and wanting to, folks to know that stuff is happening. We're definitely not just sitting around and content with where things are. Realize that improvements could be made, and that's something we're definitely focused Longer term there too, just looking at more ways we can automate the process. There is a lot of data entry in some of this, and so there's things we can do to potentially speed some of that up with automation. And then like the completeness reviews, I mean, we're starting to see, or we'll start to see some improvements here in the coming weeks, but fully expect it will take a little bit more time to get some of the added benefits that we're hoping to get there. And then the last piece is the system impact studies. And that's just a lot more complex of an issue to talk through. And so to highlight just a couple of things there, I mean, we have a lot of penetration on a small amount of feeders in Minnesota, and that does create a lot of challenges, as well as we've had, a fair number of, I say a fair number, but a few different unique situations with foreign utilities or even capacity constraints on feeders where we just, it's unclear on what the next steps always are. And so those things always take a little bit more time to resolve. And we expect we'll continue to see more of those as we move forward. But we're definitely making more strides there to make improvements. One of the things I think to point out as a goal in the system impact study is there's really three things we're kind of balancing. We're looking at, speed. Obviously, we want to do this as quickly as possible. But we also are looking out for the reliability of the system and our existing customers and future customers. And so we want to make sure that we're taking that into account. And then cost as well. I mean, we want these things to be efficient. We don't want to spend excess amounts of money on our end or on the developer's end. And so we're really trying to balance all those things. And sometimes that can be difficult to do within a 30-day time window. And so that's just something I wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of. Likewise, with the complexities, it's taking an increasing skill set from our engineers to do this type of a thing. It's not something we can just hand off to other folks or even bring in new employees to just run with it. It takes years of real training and understanding of systems and modeling. And I think we're fortunate at Xcel to have a few individuals who are really top notch in the industry, really involved in the industry and the interconnection process. And that's really helped us. Still, don't want to downplay the complexities and some of the things going on the interconnection side and how difficult those can be to address. Looks like there's another question here from Yoki. Does Xcel use engineers or different staff checking screens that just require someone to compare two numbers? Many utilities use non-engineers to check screens that just involve, for example, checking the size of a project. Yeah, we use a few different people in the interconnection process and in screens. We're not using the same people in the screens that are involved in the system impact studies, for instance. And we have leveraged interns to do some of that work. It's not we want interns to be, have them on full time, but that is something where that fits and where the complexities are. We can change resources accordingly. So yeah, in regards to just changes, that's kind of the spiel on system impact studies. Some of the things we're doing in light of that is probably the biggest thing right now with the most immediate effect is the tracking, where we're just doing a lot more day-to-day tracking of where things are at, more internal goals, and having more meetings to try to address issues as they come up, that type of a thing. I think that's one of the bigger things that are going to help decrease some of the system impact study links. Also, we've transitioned some of the workload to area engineering in a more efficient manner, among some other things that we're looking at doing here too. Longer term, the modeling is one of the big things that we're trying to work to more of like a proactive type modeling. It takes a little bit of time to get models correct and ready for the interconnection system impact studies. So if we can do a little bit more on that front end and understanding where projects are coming potentially or where there's more interest, we can do some of that, before these requests come in for interconnection. And so there's things we can do to, not 100% make that go efficiently at this point, but things we can do to make that go a little bit better. Also some data validation efforts, and then transmission is another big one that we're continuing to have more and more discussion with our transmission group and MISO as well, on just how do we study these things going forward? What are those impacts, and how do we, alert them to certain things happening on the distribution system that they might have more interest in? So that's a continuing involvement. Yeah, and so in the end, with the impact studies, there's things that are happening today that that are helping us get a little bit quicker on how we can turn some of that around, realizing those improvements. But longer term, due to the complexities and all the things happening and kind of unique situations that occur with system impact studies, it's difficult to address 100% all the time. That we're not gonna always be able to necessarily turn it around in those 30 days just because of everything happening, all these kind of unforeseen issues. And just highlighting too, we've got over 700 megawatts of solar gardens on our system, and I think a few of you have heard this stat too before. It's under 15% of our feeders, so heavy penetration on those feeders. And they continue to bring up new issues, new things that haven't been seen in the industry before, or once or twice by some utility at some other location. So it's just taking more time, more effort to figure these things out, and we want to do a good job at doing that too. We don't want to rush them through. So I think that's all I have for this. Are there any other questions before we move on to the hosting capacity discussion? Another one from Yoki here. Let's see, you mentioned that there are a few feeders with high penetration and minimal available capacity today. Does Xcel plan to inform customers of known limitations in a notes field of the HCA pop-up boxes? That is something we've talked about. That's good feedback. Today, what we've done is in the pre-application data process, we've included some notes. So if someone asks for information on those feeders, we've been able to provide that information back to them, saying, hey, this is heavily penetrated feeder. There could be issues here with interconnecting. Hosting capacity, that's something we haven't fully figured out how we would do, but maybe that's a good way to do that, is in a notes field, something like that, where we could highlight that. So that's back. Thanks, Yoki. Okay, anything else? Last chance on.
I would just note, Chris, today that there is the queue that also gives some indication about that. So, but we will consider Yoki's comment about having that information ready, so the folks don't need to submit a pre-app. So.
All right. This is Luther Miller from Xcel Energy. I'm going to be taking these next few slides and just kind of queuing up our discussion today. First, I want to remind all attendees that our discussion today is based around this first use case for the hosting capacity analysis and for the map and report, focusing on the hosting capacity analysis as an early indicator for interconnection. And in order to give that use, including the discussion of more frequent updates, as well as targeted updates for specific information, we want to highlight that our sixth workshop held next Tuesday will be covering how the hosting capacity analysis relates with the MinDip process, including pre-application data reports, replacing or supplementing our screening process, as well as automating that interconnection process. So again, today we are primarily focusing on the hosting capacity's current and past use case as a indicating tool for developers. Quickly wanted to give a summary of some of the changes that we've made to the hosting capacity analysis over time. Our process began in 2015 and 2016, where we first worked with EPRI, Xcel Energy first worked with EPRI to acquire the drive tool and utilize that as our main hosting capacity analysis tool with our first filing in 2016. In 2017, we changed our methodology to the centralized method, which supported the interconnection use case. I would cite our previous discussions in workshops 1 through 3, where we sort of discussed some of those differences between centralized and other methods of hosting capacity analysis. We also developed and implemented the heat map to accompany our tabular report. In 2018, we added the reverse power flows and analysis criteria, and in 2019, performed hosting capacity analysis with actual daytime minimum loading and power factor information where it was available in our system. We also added unintentional islanding as an analysis criteria and included the pop-up functionality with its added information to the heat map. Again, we just want to highlight and clarify that the hosting capacity analysis has been a living, breathing process over the years that it's been implemented, and we have been committed to continuing to evolve and make the process better in order to fit the use case provided by both the commission as well as our stakeholders. Also, a quick note that over this span of time, the EPRI Drive tool has made significant changes, more on a behind the scenes level, including its underlying analysis and functionalities, things like run times, et cetera. Looks like we have a question in chat. Could you please remind me how, this is from Yoki, could you please remind me how the reverse power flow criteria is set? Is it evaluated at a low side substation bus bar? It's more, and Chris, please feel free to step in and correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it is it's best described as based on the loading or minimum loading of the feeder, where as soon as generation grows larger than the set minimum loading, that criteria is triggered.
Yeah, that's correct. And there is some ability to change where that is looked at. We're just looking at the feeder breaker essentially at the substation. So any reverse flow going into the substation.
Lastly, this is a graphic we've used several times, but again, highlighting that today's discussion is primarily around the hosting capacity analysis as it sits currently as an identifying and informing tool, rather than our future use cases of integrating it with the actual interconnection process as a tool that works alongside or directly inside the interconnection application process. With that, I believe I will be turning it back over to Jody unless there are any other questions.
Thank you, Luther.
Great, thank you.
All right, now we're at the interactive part of today's session, or the more interactive part, I guess I would say, of today's workshop. And we're going to be using some polling capabilities within Zoom and just some facilitated discussion. We're going to be trying to stay on a bit of a schedule here. allowing, we're going to try to bound it with about 20 minutes for each kind of category of discussion so that we're sure that we get through everything, acknowledging then that we'll have a little bit of time in the end to go back and also just have some general discussion and feedback at the end. So with that said, I think we can step forward here, Luther. So as we talk about the hosting capacity remaining an early indicator for the interconnection process, we thought it was important to just step back and remember the measurement of success that the commission has set for that, for the hosting capacity in that function. It needs to be detailed enough to provide developers with a reliable estimate of the available hosting capacity at the feeder and subfeeder levels, and provide sufficient information to give developers a starting point for the interconnection applications. So we're going to explore these attributes of this measurement of success a little bit here over the next 40 minutes or so. So please keep this in mind as we're moving forward into the discussion and the polling. Next slide, Luther. Here's a little preview of some of the questions. Again, we've got a little reminder of the measurement of success. We're talking about enough detail, sufficient information, reliable estimate, and so that it can serve as a starting point. So we're going to be asking a lot of what's, why's, how's kinds of questions. What information do you need? What information would be ideal? Why is that needed or desirable? And how would you use the information? We want to explore the value that that would provide to your customers and to your business. We're going to ask you to describe your ideal hosting capacity analysis tool. And we're going to ask you what you would, if you could be the one to decide what should we prioritize deliver first? What is your ideal functioning of the hosting capacity tool? So we know kind of what maybe that end goal is, or if we could bound a roadmap, kind of first step and last step, or not last step, but last step here in this process. And then what information or functionality would you be willing to pay for? All right, we're going to do our first poll. So I've got my fingers crossed a little bit that all of this comes together. If everybody can please answer these 3 questions in the poll, then we'll take it, the results of that into discussion. Great, we've got some answers flowing in. All right, we'll give it about another 10 seconds and then we'll look at the results. If you haven't done the poll yet, if you would please do that, that would be great. All right, we're going to end the polling. And here's our results. Can everybody see those?
Yes.
I don't. don't see them. I'm on the web-based version of Zoom.
Okay. Paget, is there something you need to do so that everybody can see both the PowerPoint and the poll?
I believe you will need to be on the app to see the results.
Shoot. Okay. Well,
We
we'll
can-
talk through them.
Yeah, I was gonna just say that.
Okay. So Luther, can you move forward one slide, please?
Absolutely.
Okay. So we do have a couple of comments in the chat, and I'll just note those here. Frequency of use is directly correlated to how often it's updated. So we have a bit of a chicken and an egg issue with the first question. We totally agree that the hosting capacity may not be used as much as it maybe would be if it were updated more than annually. So I absolutely agree with that. And then the second comment is, keep in mind there's non-developers on the call that don't have a reason to use the hosting capacity map but are interested in how it functions. Oh, great. That's a great comment. So thank you for that. So the first question in the poll was, how often do you use the current iteration of the hosting capacity map or tabular report? 42% of the respondents, 5 folks, said they rarely use the map or the tabular report. A third said monthly, 17% said weekly, and 1 said daily. So it's not being used a lot today, which again is not a surprise. Do you feel the current iteration of the hosting capacity analysis is detailed enough to provide a reliable estimate of hosting capacity at the feeder and subfeeder level? Almost 60%, 58% of the respondents said that they haven't used it enough to know. 1 respondent said yes, and 4 respondents said it's not detailed enough. And the third question was, do you feel the current iteration of the hosting capacity analysis provides sufficient information for you to make preliminary decisions regarding applying for interconnection? We have 8% at yes or 1, 50% said no, and 5 respondents, or 42% of the respondents said they haven't used it enough to know. So not a lot of surprises. It's not getting used a lot right now, and that's a lot of the reason why we're talking about this. So what we'll get into next are going to be what kinds of changes could we make to make it more useful. We have another comment from somebody that they don't personally have experience or an immediate need for the hosting capacity, so not able to participate in the poll, might drop out if I'm not able to answer the poll questions. I think this is the only set of poll questions that are related to the current hosting capacity tool. The rest of the questions should be more focused on what kind of functionality you would want in the hosting capacity. So we're hoping that you do stick with us and share your feedback on that. And then we've got a comment here too from Steve. Right now, the hosting capacity analysis doesn't help determine the qualities of a DER interconnection on feeder, how an interconnection agreement on feeder A will impact an interconnection agreement on feeder B. It's related to the on hold status. Thank you for that, Steve. We've noted that. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the hosting capacity as an early indicator. Then when we talk about one of the measures being reliable, it needs to provide a reliable estimate. What does that mean to you? If you'd please unmute and join in a discussion about that. What does it mean for the estimate to be reliable? Okay, we got a comment in chat. So current results, which gets at the frequency, absolutely. Other thoughts?
Is there even enough information there for me to, am I even in the right area, or should I be looking someplace else for capacity? Because there's no need to start looking to build a solar garden if there's no capacity there in that, you know, county or area.
Sure. And so do you feel like the majority of the information that you need is currently there? Or are there specific things that aren't there today that you'd like to see, which is kind of going to get into our second part of this discussion piece?
But we've had enough idea that this area is green, so we can go look there, but without having an engineer actually go, yeah, there is capacity on the backside. Do we proceed, or do we look for some other area that's green and hopefully we can find something there? You know, it's kind of like throwing darts at a dartboard right now, and oh, there's a green area, but does that really mean it's green?
Okay.
So it sounds like sort of a, would you say it sounds like a question of trust of the results of the hosting capacity, where you will look at the map and say, okay, this appears green. The map is telling me one thing, but I'm experiencing another thing, and having that trust in the map?
Well, I guess trust isn't necessarily the word I'd use. If it's not updated, if it's only updated annually, we've looked at a couple different areas, and now we've actually got a landowner who's willing to lease us some space. And now we find out that the only way to do a 2 meg there is run it off from 2 different feeders. We can't run it off from 1 feeder. But we didn't know that without consulting an engineer.
Sure. Thank you.
You're
Looks
welcome.
like we have a few other comments in chat.
Okay, so we have one that went to the panelists. Again, just a reminder, when you're doing chat, if you can do the drop-down box where it says to, and be sure that you check all panelists and attendees. So this comment is aggregated reporting on listed available capacity from the hosting capacity analysis on given feeders versus the actual capacity after a study would be helpful to understand the year-over-year reliability. Thank you for that comment, Dan. And then we have a comment from Steve. It would be useful to know Xcel service transformer size and voltage. Thank you.
Hi, this is Yoki with IREC. Can you hear me?
Yes, yep, I can hear you, Yoki.
Oh, great, thanks. So yeah, one of the things that I put in the comment box I don't think has been mentioned yet really kind of echoes what we heard from some of the other parties just now, which is, you know, the 2 things would be up-to-date results as well as validated results. And so that means both making sure that the results that are provided on the map are up to date, which we've talked about a lot already, and then also, you know, going through a validation process to make sure that there has been a transparent, perhaps by an independent third party, you know, review of the results to see that they, you know, accurately and reliably indicate the actual hosting capacity available at the particular locations. And I think, you know, the example of, you know, comparing actual interconnection studies to, you know, to the hosting capacity that was published is a good example of one way that validation can be performed.
And Yoki, why an independent third party? Why not just an internal QA assessment?
You know, internal would be a good first step, you know, which is why we proposed having the, you know, draft of a validation report put out, and then, you know, to allow comments and looking at how that, you know, process would go before, you know, before having the commission finalize that. I think that's certainly a good first step, but I think when you talk about the the gold standard of validation. I think that's normally and the gold standard of, allowing others to be able to trust what is put out there, and that's having an independent party look at it.
And so just to further expand on that, in Xcel's previous filings, we have issued some of those validation metrics comparing hosting capacity results to screens and studies with associated feeders. How would your vision of that validation differ from, again, on the internal level, from what we have already provided in previous filings?
So I don't have all the answers right now about the best way to go about validation. As we mentioned in our comments last year, I don't think that a national best practice for validation has really been established yet. We're still in the process of figuring out what that would take. And so that's why we recommended kind of the process where we could, review the validation process and provide comments on it. I don't have all the answers right now. I'm not the right person to run the validation study. You certainly don't want me doing that, but I'd want the chance to get people who know what they're doing in that area to put their eyes on the process and make sure that it's something that they think is a good representation of the way that could be done as well.
For sure. Thank you.
How would you quantify the additional benefit of having a third party provide that validation? Because that is one of the things we're asked to look at as we go through this effort. Because there will be a cost with that.
I'm not sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah, certainly be a cost associated with that. I think, to me, having a third party look at something and issue, recommendations, a knowledgeable and informed third party, that provides a much greater level of trust amongst, stakeholders and hopefully, from the commission as well when looking at the results.
Thank you.
All right, well, this was good discussion. Thank you for that. I know we'll talk about this in our report in November, and we'll also touch on when we had Matt Rylander from EPRI on our sessions in June. He talked a little bit about an effort that EPRI is undertaking across across the hosting capacity tool providers to come up with a way for them to be able to validate the results of their tools as the developers of those tools. And so we'll be sure to touch on that too in our November report. All right. So let's move.
If I could expand on that for a second.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think there are really two different kinds of validation that we're talking about, and I want to make sure that we that we're looking at both. One is making sure that the model that you're using, the drive model, is producing accurate results when it's set up correctly. And then the other is looking at Xcel's implementation of that model and making sure that Xcel's implementation, is appropriate and is validated. So I just wanted to draw a differentiation between those two. Thanks.
That makes sense. Thank you, Yoki. Okay. Well, I think we're going to move into the next set of questions. So we're going to do a poll and ask what frequency of updates would be sufficient. And again, pointing back to that measurement from the commission to make it reliable, make it a reliable estimate and provide a starting point for interconnection applications. So even if you're not using it today, what frequency of update do you think is important? All right, it looks like the answers are not updating. So I think everybody who's planning to answer has answered. So I think we're going to go ahead and end the polling. So for those of you that aren't able to see the results on your screen, we're asking about the frequency of updates to meet the success criteria that the commission has set for the hosting capacity to be that initial indicator for the interconnection process. And monthly is the top answer with 64% of the responses, or nine responders on that one. Quarterly had 2 votes, or 14%, same for weekly. And then there was 1 vote for daily at 7%. All right, so let's talk about that. Can we, Paget, I'm not sure if you do if you pull the results down or. All right, so let's talk about the frequency. Monthly was the top answer at 64%. So whether you answered monthly, quarterly, weekly, or daily, can you share why that's important? And how it would impact your business, you know, the way that you do business with your customers, all of that.
The reason I'd put in weekly is, again, when I'm looking for sites, I certainly don't need daily information, but if things change, monthly seems like it's too far apart. So that's why I was thinking weekly would be best without undue burden on Xcel having to update it daily.
Okay. I see, Michelle, you have your hand raised.
Hi, I had a question, and I don't know if this will come up later, but in thinking about whether the results are reliable and the frequency of update, I remember one of the things being discussed was whether you could just update parts of the system where there are changes. But I know that changes in one part could impact another. And so I don't know if you have an update about when you're talking about how frequently you update, if you're talking about the whole system or the whole map, or if you would be able to do it by, say, substation or some other geographic area based on changes happening.
That's a great question. And we do have additional questions that explore partial updates or targeted updates and what kind of information people would like to see updated with the greatest frequency. This is just kind of generally how frequent do you think is necessary for it to be reliable to you and provide you sufficient information. So maybe we should just go ahead and jump into that. We do have a comment from Steve that I just want to read at this part before we move forward. For reliability and trustworthiness, the updates to the hosting capacity should be done each time an interconnection agreement is processed and an analysis is performed. Remove any latency to the information. I've been caught in situations where less than a week separated the application and another application, and that changed the capacity. Thank you, Steve, for that. So let's move forward and start talking about specific updates. Is anything short of a full update helpful? So are there pieces of information that you would like to see updated more frequently? Or you know, we have Steve's comment that's talking about now that we've had an application or an agreement get executed and the system is coming online, that would be a targeted update, or I would view that, I guess, as a targeted update in that particular area.
Some other examples could be specifically targeting the information in the pop-ups, that being updated perhaps on a more frequent basis than the full analysis, as well as specifically, like Jody just mentioned, the feeders that experienced greater than a certain amount of new interconnections, whether that's wattage or volume, since the previous update cycle. So just as sort of examples of what we'd like to hear input regarding.
Hi, this is Yoki. Are you going to be putting up the criteria that you used for updates? And we discussed that a little bit, and it seemed like it would be helpful to just look at the specific criteria that you used for updating before, as we're having this discussion.
Previously in this PowerPoint?
No, we've had multiple discussions about updates over the past 3 years, and I believe Xcel laid out 3 different criteria that they used for for rebuilding feeder models in the past. One was the amount of new generation. The other was if there was a configuration change. And I'm trying to do this off the top of my head, so I could have get it wrong, but I think the third was load changes.
I believe you hit all 3 of those. I can quickly
Very
add,
impressive, Yoki.
yeah. I can quickly add those to the slide if people would like to have that as a reminder. Xcel team, would you like me to add
Yeah, well,
those?
I think that's just a good example and good context of the fact that stakeholders are not asking for, or have not in the past asked for a full update of every feeder on a monthly basis, but
Sure.
just to use that targeted update criteria that Xcel has developed in order to decide which feeders should be remodeled when performing updates.
Absolutely. Thank you.
This is Michelle, and maybe amongst those criteria, one thing I was wondering is, and it's not clear to me as someone who uses the hosting capacity map pretty infrequently, is how obvious it is to the viewer of changes at the substation. I know the substation amounts are in the pop-ups, but if that shows up in a way that people could see in the same way that like a change on a feeder can be a little more apparent, because it seems like that's an issue that's causing some delays in interconnection, is things happening substation wide. So I don't know if you could speak to whether like the color on the maps is updated as substations change, or if you have to like either have the spreadsheet or the pop-ups to get that information. And otherwise, like how would a customer know that that's happening at the substation level?
Yeah, that's good feedback too. Right now it's feeder level exclusively, so figuring out how to indicate substation level constraints is something that could be looked at more.
And this is Yoki again. I'll mention it again. I said this on the last call. The only thing that I've seen updated more frequently than the hosting capacity results is the public queue numbers, and that would be the public queue and connected generation at both the substation and feeder level. And generally, what I've seen is that if the if the public queue is updated more frequently than the hosting capacity map, then those, queue and connected generation values are updated every time the public queue is updated.
This is Michelle, but I don't think the public queue for Excel shows substation, does it? I think it only shows feeder.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
So I think, so the request, the request, what it would be great to see, immediately, would be an update of those queued data, both at the substation and the feeder level every time the public queue is updated.
So with that, and bear with me because I'm not a distribution engineer, does that, if the queue information were updated, would you also expect then that the available hosting capacity gets recalculated with that?
So just to clarify, does Xcel currently updates the queue on the public queue how often?
I don't know if anybody's seeing the chat, but yeah, it's monthly.
Monthly. Okay. Yeah. So, I think, if Xcel is going to propose to do anything but monthly updates for, the HCA values itself, the request would be that you update the public queue values monthly, even if you're not updating the HCA values themselves monthly. Although, again, we've been asking for years now for, all the values to be updated on a monthly level.
Thank you for clarifying that, Yogi.
This is Isabel from Fresh Energy. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Yep. Hi, Isabel.
Hi. Great discussion. I just wanted to, maybe this is more of a question for Yogi, but maybe a suggestion for the Xcel team too. If there was to be an update to queued and installed DER numbers on the map or tab report that was more frequent than the update to the hosting capacity value, are there best practices that you've seen, Yogi, or does the Xcel team have thoughts about how to communicate that to viewers? I would just be concerned that people would not understand that the hosting capacity number might not be reflecting the same inputs that are showing up in the pop-up box. But if there were just simply some lines that said, hosting capacity modeling last done on a date, and then ER values last input on a second date, I think that might communicate it. But if there are better ways to do that, that might be worth noting. Though I agree with you, seems clear a lot of stakeholders would love both to be updated on a monthly basis.
Yeah, Isabel, the way that you described it is exactly the way that it's been implemented in other states. But again, I'm not bargaining against myself here. The real value will come with monthly updates to the HCA itself.
Great, agreed. Thank you, Bill. That was helpful to know.
That's a good question, and that's something we looked at this last round with the pop-up boxes. There are 2 dates in there currently. One for the hosting capacity, when that was last run, and the other was with the intention of, if we do upgrade or update the queue information more frequently, there's another date in there for that update as well. So that was kind of the thinking, and to your question, Isabel, too, or I think, does that get too confusing? Is that something that is maybe a little bit harder to track? And might be just more information than is maybe even necessary or able to be, everybody to utilize in the best fashion.
Developers are pretty sophisticated parties. So again, let's just give them all the information and they'll certainly figure out how to use it. And to the extent that there's any confusion, an updated user guide, I'm sure could help, resolve any confusion. But, developers really, I'm sure will use any and all data that is available and given to them.
Yeah, I think having the 2 dates would be sufficient, though I agree, of course, preferable would be just having the HCA results match the inputs that are being presented.
All right,
Sounds good.
this was
Thank
really
you.
good discussion and great ideas. It seems like from the comments and the discussion that the impact of this would be that everybody would be able to be more efficient with the way that you're planning your projects. Do I have that right? If the information were more current, it would be a more valuable tool, better, reliable indicator, and that would improve your efficiency in being able to get projects up and going sooner or cite your projects. Is that right? Okay, I got one yes.
Site and design.
Okay, great. All right, anything additional on this one? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question, the next topic. All right, I think we're ready to move on. We have one more poll question. So right now, the hosting capacity analysis is a free tool. It's on the Xcel Energy website. And so if it could provide additional information that's not currently available or additional functionality, and again, only thinking about it only in its current capacity as an early indicator for the interconnection process, would you be willing to pay for it? Or is it important to you that this piece, being an early indicator, remains free? All right, it looks like voting is pretty much ended. We've got 7 of 20 folks that are online right now that voted. We're going to end the polling. So the question was, if the hosting capacity analysis could give you additional information that's not currently available, would you be willing to pay for this added usability? And if so, in what ways? And so 38% said no. I would expect it to be no charge like it is now. 50%, or 4 out of 8 responses, said a subscription service. And then 1 replied other. So thank you for that. Let's talk about this. So I don't know if the person who said other is open to sharing what other kind of model you'd like to see.
Yeah, hi, this is Yoki. I hit other. And that's really because I think that you're trying to narrowly have this conversation in the context of the current use case, but I don't really think that that's the appropriate context to have this conversation in, because we already have a commission that has committed to using the HCA in the interconnection process. And so when we're talking about using the HCA in the interconnection process, we're talking about providing public information so that projects know in advance, based on public information, whether they will pass certain screens or not. And so generally, I don't think it's appropriate to put this kind of information behind a paywall. And especially, considering how it is to be used in the future. The other thing I would say is that, a lot of the work that goes into this is work on the back end that is, making Xcel's data that it already has easily accessible. And it's not clear to me that the actual, cost of providing that data more than once necessitates having a fee. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you for the feedback, Yoki. Yes, the Commission has set a long-term goal for the hosting capacity to replace the fast track screens in the interconnection process, but also ordered us to examine these use cases, with one of them being the one that we're talking about today, looking at what would the costs and benefits associated with the hosting capacity remain an early indicator, however, with some changes, more frequent updates, additional information, or that kind of thing. So that's why we're doing this analysis. Okay, so some of you answered subscription. About half of the respondents said subscription service. So I'm assuming you're thinking just like it would be like a monthly kind of thing where are you thinking unlimited views or, some kind of 50 views, or do you have anybody willing to jump in and talk a little bit about how you would want, or how you kind of envision a subscription working? Or feel free to put something in chat as well if you don't want to unmute and talk. We'll also be, like I said before, we're going to be sending out a survey with these questions, but in a survey format over sometime in the next few days to everybody who both attended, as well as all of the interested parties, with so that you can provide some feedback in that mechanism too. So if you're more comfortable doing it in that format, that's great. We would just ask that you take a few minutes when you get that. Okay, so we've got a couple of responses here in the chat. There's already a fee for the pre-application report. If additional detail could be made available, it could be added to the list of pre-application. If it's readily available, it can go into the hosting capacity map or the queue report. Please, no more fees beyond what there are already in the supplemental studies, pre-application reports, facility studies, and system impact studies. Thank you for that, Steve. We appreciate that additional feedback. Also, we heard from Eddie. It looks like, Eddie, your comment went to the panelists. So Eddie says yearly for all the data that is updated. So that so the subscription, if I'm understanding this right, Eddie, would be an annual subscription, and then you would have access to all of the updated data for that period of time. All right, I got it right. Thank you for that.
Hi, Jody. This is Isabel again. I said I would not suggest or be interested in a fee, and that's mainly because Fresh Energy and other nonprofits, and I'm I know several government entities also use the report more for informational rather than development use cases. And obviously the report, the map is designed for the interconnection use case. And, we have to know that when viewing it, but I think there is an important public interest in having at least this early indicator, if not further use cases available on a public basis. And we had a discussion about this in the most recent comment process, and I feel like Xcel's sort of echoed our concern about charging for it, just in that it may reduce or narrow down the audience for the report, and it would become potentially complicated to have a free model and a subscription model, and who gets access to what level of data. I don't know. It could certainly work, but it seems to us that best practice nationally is that they're free, although occasionally require an account, but usually a free login to be created. And we do think there's a lot of public benefit to having there be a free resource with this, grid information about what's happening on the system or the feeder in your neighborhood, that kind of thing.
That's great feedback and perspective, Isabel. I do recall us talking about that, and I agree there are public policy benefits to having a free tool of some kind available. And we're not necessarily suggesting that there should be a charge. I hope we're not implying that to anybody here. We're just trying to fully explore this use case and what people would really like to see. And depending on where we go with it, is going to kind of depend on what that cost profile looks like. And then we would just want to give the commission information about what those costs and benefits look like, so they can decide, where they want us to go. So I hope we didn't imply that we're going in this direction.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
And this is Yoki with IRIC again. I just want to kind of acknowledge what we heard on the last call about developers being really concerned about how the interconnection process is proceeding today, and about the problems with the administration of the interconnection process. And I know I appreciate that Xcel made talk through some slides early on about how that the immediate steps that might be taken to improve that. All that being said, the investments here in the hosting capacity map and providing updated frequency is also something that I think can and should be viewed as an investment that will help alleviate some of those concerns and problems that Xcel is having now with administering its interconnection process. And so when we're talking about the benefits, I think we should certainly think about that as well, because being unable to comply with timelines that are set in the MINDIP is something that requires investment to remedy the problem, and the hosting capacity map is one way to do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Yoki. All right, I think we're ready to step into the ideal world here. So this is one of those ideal world questions that I warned you was coming. So out of everything that we talked about today, what that would make the hosting capacity a valuable initial indicator for you? What change do you want us to make first? What should that first step in our roadmap look like? And Yoki brought this up before. The commission has set a long-term goal for the hosting capacity to replace the fast track screens. And so if we think of that as right now, kind of that end point for the near term, what should the first point look like? This is an important one for us because we want to understand where people think that we should be spending our time right out of the chute. We don't want to make an update or make a change or something that we've heard would be an improvement, but have it be not satisfying. So help us with what would be important to you for us to deliver first.
And we understand that this question might be a summary of the things we have already discussed in this workshop, but if you could just reiterate any foundational points, that would definitely be helpful.
Yeah, this is Yoki. Happy to say it again. More frequent updates. There we go. And validation would be great too, but I think more frequent updates is absolutely number one.
And we're seeing that. We're getting some in the chat too. Consistent updates. First priority would be to make the hosting capacity as current as the queue monthly at least. So very consistent with that. All right, point taken. Anything additional on that? All right. Then our next ideal world question is, describe your ideal hosting capacity availability tool such that it would be a reliable indicator and provide sufficient information. And this we've talked about, assuming it's already being updated more frequently and all of that. Talk about how you want it to work. What do you want to see? How do you want that to work? What functionality do you want it to have? Again, take your paintbrush and paint this ideal tool to be that early indicator for you. Today we have the heat map, we have a tabular report, we've got some pop-ups with some additional details. Right now it's kind of requiring people to look at the queue as well as to what's going on. Okay, we have a comment to know if I'm in a spot that has capacity. That's perfect. Eliminate guesswork. Here's another one. The ideal tool would also allow a user to download base shape files, which are shown in the map, so developers and others can overlay with internal layers to better screen potential sites. The current tool is only online and limits to non-aggregated analysis.
Yeah, this is Yoki. Something that I would add with that, and I think might be consistent with Dan's comment, is to provide API access to the data, so that developers can get access to the results and all the data provided through the API, and then use it on in their own software and on their own computer. Shape files definitely as well, I think is another way to do that, but it's really providing that automated use, so that customers can load this data up in their own GIS application or with their own database that has API access. And then you're asking for my ideal world. I feel like I've briefed that multiple times in a row, so I would certainly encourage you to go back and look at IREX comments from previous years as well. There's a lot more in there, but I won't take up everyone's time right now with that.
This is Michelle. Could people speak to, I know we've talked about capacity, but I also heard design. And I know one of the things that I think came up at an earlier workshop was that there are some points of information where even a non-exporting system may not be able to move forward. So could people speak to like ideal world for like helping with design, what they would want to see?
Thanks, Michelle. This is Yoki again. I think providing those technical criteria violations is something that really helps developers put together a design, because by knowing which which criteria is causing the the limit and causing the need for an upgrade, developers can then decide, okay, my project is likely to not be affected by this criteria, or my project is likely to be affected by this criteria. Another thing that I think would be helpful for that is load profiles. Having access to to an hourly load profile. A developer could also then go in and be a little bit more specific about when their solar project was going to be exporting, and match that up with the hours of load on the system, and make sure that they're not causing any violations there. So hourly load profile, I think, would also meet that need.
Okay, it looks like that was seconded in the comments. Steve also asked to unify the hosting capacity map with the queue sheet. For example, when an attribute table is pulled up, it would also have the queue status on it. We also had a second of the API access. Anything additional? All right, well, it looks like we're going to probably wrap up a little bit early. Luther, can you move to the next slide? So we have another session on September 15th. That's where we're going to get into the use cases that would have the hosting capacity integrating with various steps in the interconnection process as outlined on this slide. So the pre-application data report, replacing the initial or the supplemental screens, or overall automation of the interconnection process. So there we'll get a little bit more in depth into where, kind of the long-term goal that the commission has set for the hosting capacity. I'm just gonna pause here and see if any of the Xcel team has any questions about any of the feedback that's been shared, if you need clarification of anything, or if any of the attendees have thought of things since we left the ideal world slide. Just want to leave a little pause of time here for that.
Hi, this is Yoki again. One more question when we're talking about what we're going to cover in the next workshop. I just wanted to make sure that the fast track eligibility table would be a part of the discussion of the integration, because I think we've seen in other jurisdictions, when you're integrating the HCA into the fast track screen, that in certain cases can the HCA results can replace the fast track eligibility table. So just wanted to make sure we had some time for that conversation as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, well, we really appreciate everybody's engagement today. As I mentioned, we're going to be sending you and everyone on our interested parties list a survey with today's polling and other discussion questions. They may be formatted a little bit differently because it's going to be a survey versus doing it here as part of a interactive workshop. So even if you participated or offered your thoughts and feedback today, we'd really appreciate you responding to that survey. It'll be more free form. It won't be like multiple choice. In some cases, it may have some of that, but we're really trying to gather more narrative or more kind of specific comments and feedback from you. We're hoping that we're designing it to be quick and easy and that it would only take you a few minutes to complete when you get it in your email. So I would ask that you do that here over the next few days. And then, as I mentioned, September 15th, we'll get back together again and we'll be diving into those use cases. It'll have the hosting capacity integrating with various pieces of the MinDib process. So if there's no further comments or questions, I just want to thank everyone for attending today, and your feedback is really important. We're very appreciative of you taking time to attend and share your thoughts, and look forward to seeing you again next week. And this concludes our workshop today.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.